Hello, Susan, Jen, and Jenny. Coming to you from Connecticut, I will be doing the presentation on navigating emotions. And now I'm going to shift to the PowerPoint. There we go. I'm still there in the corner, but a little bit harder to see. Okay, so in the first slide we have a young man navigating the emotions, going through the whitewater rapids and doing his best to stay balanced, centered, and afloat. Let's start with Greenspan. As you know, he developed a concept of 6 milestones that are considered to be a developmental ladder where each rung or milestone is built upon the previous one. First milestone is very important, is the one about self-regulation and interest in the world. In this particular stage, the baby must process sensory input. Baby has to organize sensations by separating and understanding which sensations are soothing and which are uncomfortable. The baby turns towards soothing sensations to calm his or herself and develops a sense of internal security. Then, the baby can become attentive and interested in the world. As the sensations are exchanged between the caregiver and the child, the emotions of pleasure and joy emerge, which leads to greater engagement and moving to the second milestone, relating. So they may approach the world within the context of relationships. Greenspan also talked about the affect diathesis hypothesis. That's a mouthful, by the way. It's a biologically based processing deficit between the affect, motor planning, and sequencing capacities and symbol formation. The ability to connect affect to motor function and symbolic representation is a critical skill. Our dear friend Susan Stillman said that emotions drive people. Emotions are important because they drive people and give meaning to personal experiences. They affect how and what children learn. They are data and do not disappear. Emotional literacy refers to the expression, validation, and experience of life to the fullest. It's important to develop an emotional vocabulary so they can identify where in the body feelings associated with a particular emotion are located, and to be able to take the time to explore the emotions. Here is someone illustrating how emotions drive people. Emotional intelligence is important to integrate thoughts and feelings. In terms of neurobiology, 2 people discuss this in their work, Dunkel-Blau and Rose. They talk about cortisol levels. Without protective relationships, the constant elevated cortisol levels result in an alteration of the brain architecture, which impacts learning and memory. They also talk about the amygdala. The amygdala is a part of the brain that controls the fight or flight response, and it acts without thinking. This can lead to impulsive actions. But when an emotion is labeled, we can activate the prefrontal cortex, which is the executive center of the brain. It communicates to the amygdala to calm down. Once the amygdala is quiet, then we can think about how to react. Some triggers that Friedman discusses are being aware of triggers in order to catch oneself and shift thoughts. Labeling emotions to activate the prefrontal cortex and shift the emotions to something more positive. He also talks about the 6 seconds pause, which is in the moment of stress, think of 6 items or topics to help calm down and shift the emotions. Friedman also says that monitoring the thoughts, feelings, and actions leads to validating, which is acknowledging, exploring, which is recognizing, and transforming, which is moving on. And he talks about how labeling the feelings zaps the intensity out of them. And here's the logo from 6 Seconds. I think Susan's familiar with that one. Interestingly, the Aetna Insurance Company is getting involved with emotional regulation and mindfulness. They have a series of slides, and this one is mindful number 30. And they say that when people find themselves in situations where they are uncomfortable, nervous, or awkward, they often try and ignore their emotions. Or they do something that takes their mind off themselves, like watching TV or playing with their phone. Unfortunately, avoiding emotions makes it hard to move on from them. Today, try to face your feelings head on. Note how you're feeling, and then without judgment, try to figure out what's causing it. Once you've found the source, you'll find it's easier to deal with it. So there we have it, words of wisdom from Aetna. So I'm glad to see that they are doing something for preventive healthcare. In terms of emotional readiness, Erlanger, as cited by Stillman, says that when emotional needs are neglected or abused, there's no empathy, and the individual is not able to feel their own pain or someone else's. Drayton, in Rose, talks about the skill of empathy is needed to navigate the shifting human emotions. And Rose talks about emotional readiness and mental health in babies. She says that caregivers must attend and respond to their needs. And parents who are already busy and in many cases overwhelmed managing parenting, childcare, work, and basic survival skills are really very needy for guidance and support to navigate their emotions effectively. In the added context of violence, substance abuse, and domestic violence, many child care transitions lack individual attention and responsiveness during the very critical period of development. For long-term well-being, it's important to monitor social-emotional infections to promote the skills of learning and memory, which have long-term range impact, not just when children are developing early on, but also during the school years and beyond. These early experiences shape children, impact resilience, and the ability to build healthy relationships with others. It's important to provide education and training for parents and staff to understand children's cues and signals and how to respond to them. Rose also lists some relationship disruptors. She says that early experiences impact the ability to build healthy relationships, and that disruptors impact the attachment and regulation skills. There are child-related disruptors, such as being born premature, medical conditions, if the baby cries a lot, regulatory difficulties, and drug and alcohol exposure. In terms of parent-child relationship disruptors, if there are separations due to hospitalization or military duty, mental illness, or foster care. There are just some examples of what might trigger some disruptions in the parent-child relationship. Here in Connecticut, a couple of hospitals have started a new approach to treat babies who are born addicted to drugs. And this was featured in an article in NPR, and the author is Tribble. And they talk about moving away from the diagnosis and the stigma and medical needs of the baby. They said it's a medical condition, it's not a moral failing. So they are providing intense inpatient services for both mom and babies. What they're trying to do is to help the mom move from shame, loneliness, and feeling overwhelmed, and they are providing guidance and support while she learns to monitor and manage her own emotional state, because the baby will sense it. They interviewed a mom who cried as she remembered the early days with her baby, and she said, "The baby wouldn't latch on. We couldn't get her to feed. I couldn't get her to stop crying. She was very fussy, and I realized I did that to her. I took her choice away, and that's one thing I still need to work through, because I haven't forgiven myself for that." So you can imagine that's a really heavy burden to carry around when you're supposed to be enjoying your newborn, enjoying being a mom, and the miracle of life that you created. Another thing is to focus on helping bond and build relationships. How to recognize the needs of the baby and respond adequately. So the parents are getting, the moms are getting that training in the hospital. It's also an opportunity for people in the hospitals, for example, the social workers, to place other resources into place so that when the mom and the baby go back to the community, there's a support system there as well. And as the mom and the baby go through the withdrawal from the drugs and alcohol, they are able to exchange emotions appropriately and have an early attachment process promoted, a healthy early attachment promoted. And Rose also talks about something called the interactive loop. She says that the baby's signals and the caregiver's responses are very important, and it's back and forth, back and forth. So it's important that that takes place so the baby feels that she is loved, that she is worthy, and that she is important. And that's really the foundation for building relationships. Here's an illustration of somebody making a bad choice, taking drugs and alcohol. In terms of clinical links related to my work as a speech pathologist, there is a documentary from 2010 titled Babies, and it presents babies and families from all over the world, specifically Namibia, Mongolia, Tokyo, and San Francisco. And the babies from Tokyo and San Francisco had nuclear families and limited extended family contacts. They had more focus on cognitive development and abstract life concepts. For example, they would sing about Mother Earth and how important she was, but they were just sitting in a circle inside a room in a studio. They weren't going outside. Whereas in Namibia and Mongolia, the babies were raised within villages and had a very strong sense of community. They had much more contact with nature and more sensory motor daily experiences. And they were part of the group and they were aware of other living things. And those babies they were more self-regulated and had much more calm dispositions and temperaments. It was very interesting to see that difference. It was it really stood out very sharply when they were featuring families they went back and forth showing families at different points in time, and those features were very salient. Here's the cover for the documentary. Another link is from Duncan Blau. He did a webinar on social emotional learning in schools. And he says when children are distracted, upset, and anxious, they cannot attend and they cannot learn. That really goes hand in hand with what Rose talked about in her book about emotional readiness. In the Play and Playground News Center in Idaho, they described a study about a school in Texas which tripled their recess time, and the results have been very positive. The students are paying better attention in class, they're following directions better, they're attempting to learn more independently and solve problems on their own, and there have been fewer disciplinary issues. So just think, they tripled the recess time. And these were the results. Before it was implemented, the teachers were concerned that they were going to have less time to get through the lesson plans. And what happened is that the children are forming better relationships. They are able to get exercise and fresh air. And when they come back to the classroom, they're focused. There are less disciplinary issues. And they are they're ready to absorb the information. So combining social emotional learning in schools and the additional recess time, the children will be less aggressive and cope with stress in more socially acceptable ways. So I think it's a really good model for more American schools to copy. And I know that in Europe there are several countries that are implementing more time outdoors for the children. So that movement is really growing and catching on, which is a really good thing. And here are just different emotions. Another clinical link is by Kempler. He used narration as a tool to help children conceptualize and express emotions. He quotes Greenspan in a 1998 study. He said that many children lack the ability to connect their underlying wishes, desires, or emotions to behavior or words that can communicate them. He said it's important to support the child's emotional development and deepen the adult-child relationship. And through the skill of narration, it links internal states to behaviors and ideas. It's neutral language, which is focused on non-verbal communication, such as facial expressions, posture, tone of voice, etc. It's how language is used in relationships. It's not just to describe the surface behaviors, but to validate and understand emotional experiences. So it adds a lot of texture to the interactions. Also, Kempler talks about how narration helps a child with the process of bilateral integration. The left hemisphere is in charge of verbal language and logic, and the right hemisphere is in charge of contextual, nonverbal, emotional components of social interaction. And he said that language can integrate when it's used to attune to the child's subjective experience, increase the emotional awareness in self and others, and facilitate regulation of emotional states, and create awareness of the link between behaviors and the emotional forces behind them. So it integrates logic and regulation. So language is a very, very powerful tool. And here is the brain. In closing, it's very important to feel loved and that we matter to someone. And Brazelton, as described in Rose, said that children's mental health depends on healthy families and strong communities. We must start early on, and that is so true. And Rose also said that responsive, consistent, and loving relationships with adults are essential at every stage of development. And here are two individuals connecting with each other. And I leave you with a really powerful quote by Peggy O'Mara. And she says, "The way we talk to our children becomes their inner voice." Thank you very much for letting me present to you via YouTube. And I will post some information in the forum so that some questions so that you can provide some feedback and let me know if you have any questions about the presentation. It's been a pleasure being in class with all of you, and I hope that our paths cross again in the near future. Thank you. Okay, here we go. Bye.